So I have a theory about Mass Effect 5's villains being gods that have influenced everything, and it's blowing my mind. They are likely the connection between the Heleus Cluster and one of the Crucible's controversial endings. And they aren't involved Protheans like I previously thought. These new villains are likely a much more terrifying threat that even influenced the Protheans in their early days. And this theory begins with the most prominent teases for the next Mass Effect, all the Milky Way and Andromeda clues. The very first tease we saw in 2020 was a shot of both galaxies, along with this tweet thread featuring executive producer Gamble. When Lazaire asked if we were getting a sequel to both the trilogy and Andromeda, Gamble replied with, "Intentional," followed by, "We show both galaxies for a reason." And then 3 years later, the Milky Way and Andromeda sequel vibe continued in this tease. We saw a table that featured an Angara, along with a Geth shockingly wearing clothes for the first time. This thread of the Milky Way and Andromeda colliding has been teased again and again, so naturally the first question we have to ask ourselves is this: what story could connect both galaxies? And of course, who would the most likely villains in this multi-galaxy story be? I think this table gives us both answers, because both the Angara and the Geth were influenced by the likely villains. And very crucially, these multi-galaxy baddies were first hinted at in the Synthesis ending. When Shepard runs towards the Crucible beam, they end up merging their energy with the Crucible's, which creates a new hybrid organic-synthetic matrix for all life forms. Now obviously this, along with the other endings, are completely illogical. So ignoring the actual process of synthesis, I think the clue behind the next Mass Effect's villains is this: the green circuitry look that affected everyone and everything after the green blast went off. Because wildly, this green circuitry is tied to the Andromeda galaxy too. In the Heleus Cluster, the main plot revolves around Ryder's interactions with a mysterious technology called Remnant Technology, or Remtech for short. Only Ryder can unlock the Remtech vaults, because of their connection with SAM, an AI that's embedded with their organic system. So the literal requirement for using Remtech is an organic-synthetic partnership. There's a clear mirroring of Remtech to the Synthesis ending, and those similarities continue with Remtech's design. In the Remtech vaults, it has a very distinct green circuitry look to it. Even the Mass Effect wiki describes Remtech as having glowing green circuit board patterns, which extends not just to its metallic creations, but even plants like we see here. Which again is very similar to what we see in the Synthesis ending, with even plant life being affected by the beam. So what do all these strange green circuit board connections have to do with the villains? Well, since Mass Effect 5 is hinting at a multi-galaxy connection, the Synthesis ending looking similar to Remtech is likely not a coincidence, which means that the ones who made Remtech likely also influenced one of the Crucible's functions. From what we know about the Crucible, countless different species obtained and made contributions to the design over the course of millions of years, which means that countless races came up with their version of how to take out the Reapers. Some races added control to the Crucible, others added destroy, and also synthesis. All the endings being dumb aside, I strongly believe that whichever species contributed the synthesis component is the same one who created Remtech in Andromeda. And of course, it was the mysterious Jardaan who created Remtech, making them the likely synthesis designers. Now, if this is legit, it makes the Jardaan the biggest connection to both galaxies. But does this make them the likely villains in the next Mass Effect? Well, as to that, I'll let Edie in the post-synthesis ending explain.
As the line between synthetic and organic disappears, we may transcend mortality itself, to reach a level of existence I cannot even imagine.
Okay, so basically, after getting blasted with the new synthesis matrix DNA, Edie feels like with enough time, she might transcend mortality. Now to me, it sounds a lot like transcending mortality would mean becoming like gods. And if we assume that the Jardaan added synthesis to the Crucible, this starts to paint a very dangerous picture. The Remtech in the Heleus Cluster already looks like it's been affected by some type of synthesis-like matrix. And since Remtech requires an organic-synthetic connection, that means that the Jardaan are very likely organic-synthetic hybrids themselves, which basically means that they've already undergone this godlike transcendence that Edie was describing. And if they are old enough to have literally designed part of the Crucible, then the Jardaan have been living like gods for millennia. which scarily enough we've seen evidence of in the Heleus Cluster. Some major Mass Effect Andromeda spoilers are about to follow. The basic function of the Remtech vaults is to terraform planets to make them more habitable. On the surface, this sounds great, and it even allows the initiative to make outposts throughout the cluster. However, viewed in another lens, it's actually pretty ominous. Terraforming planets basically alters what already exists to fit the terraformer's desires. So in a nutshell, the Jardaan didn't like what existed prior, so they used their technology to make it into what they wanted. And they even took this concept a step further by creating an entire world for themselves, called Meridian. But the real kicker is that terraforming and creating planets isn't the craziest thing the Jardaan have done. Near the end of the game, we learn that the Jardaan have literally created entire organic beings, which are the Angara. All major creation stories involve gods creating beings. So with this, the Jardaan are looking more and more like they fit EDI's transcending mortality description. But until now, the Jardaan have limited their godlike influence to only the Heleus Cluster, that we know of anyway, which I believe is about to change in Mass Effect 5. Let's look at everything so far to figure out the next Mass Effect's plot. The biggest teases have all centered around the Milky Way and Andromeda both being involved, and the Jardaan is the likely connection between the two. In both galaxies, their influence has been through organic-synthetic combinations, either through the synthesis ending or Remtech. And now in the latest tease, we're seeing an Angaran angrily pointing at a Geth in clothes. So here's my theory about the plot. For the first time ever, Geth are wearing clothes, which is a very organic tradition. And with the Angaran pointing angrily at them, I'm thinking they're mad about something related to the Jardaan. So basically, this tease as a whole is hinting that the Jardaan are influencing the Geth by making them more organic. Since the Jardaan's influence centers around blurring the line between organics and synthetics, this Geth represents that philosophy in action. Through the simple act of wearing clothes, the line between organics and synthetics is becoming blurred, which means the likely plot for the next Mass Effect is this. The Jardaan believe that every species should be a hybrid of organics and synthetics. Basically, they believe in synthesis through force. Now, I just want to be very clear that this is likely different from what the synthesis ending does in Mass Effect 3. The synthesis ending merges Shepard's energy with the Crucible, which gives all life a deeper understanding of one another, thus ending all conflict. This is because synthesis only unlocks if you have enough war assets, which is only achieved through helping as many races as possible. So by literal gameplay design, synthesis in Mass Effect 3 is about togetherness and understanding one another on a deeper level. However, the Jardaan synthesis philosophy comes across as much more controlling. They forcibly terraform and create beings for unknown reasons, which doesn't match the synthesis ending with Shepard's influence. And before anyone asks, no, I don't believe this theory in any way confirms a canon ending. I still believe that no ending will be canonized in Mass Effect 5. So with this type of plot in the next game, we have a much clearer picture of what the other teases mean, because the Milky Way has been teased very often, implying that that galaxy will be the primary setting. And the Milky Way would be the Jardaan's home galaxy if they did design part of the Crucible. So who are these villainous Jardaan if this is the case? Who will we be likely facing off against in the next Mass Effect? To figure out the identity of these godlike beings, let's go over some Jardaan facts and why my previous theory on who they are has been blown to shreds. We already know that the Jardaan created the Angara, terraform planets, and that their technology requires an organic synthetic component. We also know from Drac that they didn't originate in the Heleus Cluster, so they could have been from the Milky Way. And if they are from the Milky Way, they are the likely ones who created the Crucible's synthesis function. Now for the big hint. For the longest time, I used this Gamble tweet as the basis of who the Jardaan could be. When a fan theorized that the Remtech in the image was Prothean, Gamble replied, or maybe it's ... which I thought for a couple years now could be finished with, or maybe it's both. This would imply that Prothean tech is the same as Remtech, which would mean the Protheans created Remtech, thus making them the Jardaan. However, there's plenty of reasons why the Protheans wouldn't be the Jardaan. Yes, they do come across as very controlling, so these Jardaan traits match pretty well, but this one about synthesis doesn't. In the Mass Effect wiki on the Protheans, it says that during the Crucible's construction, some Protheans came to believe that the Reapers could be controlled with the device. So if anything, the Protheans didn't contribute synthesis to the Crucible. they likely contributed the control component. There was also no known Prothean group that escaped the Milky Way, so it'd be a minor retcon if there was one. So this is why I'm starting to believe that the Jardaan weren't Prothean. But we can't discount Gamble drawing attention to the Prothean-Jardaan connection, which is why I'm now starting to believe an even more unhinged theory that still connects both races. In the new theory, the Jardaan aren't Prothean. Instead, the Jardaan created the Protheans, just like how they made the Angara. And here's why it makes sense. Between the Protheans and Angara, there are a lot of coincidental similarities. They have similar looking sharp canines and teeth gaps, and there's even an early ancestral statue on Aya that very much resembles a Prothean. Also, the Protheans are known to store their memories in devices which can then be viewed later. And while not identical, the Angarans are known to regain memories from their past lives by touching an object they previously owned. There are enough coincidences between them that they must be connected somehow. However, instead of the Protheans having created the Angara through their new Jardaan persona, this new theory is much simpler. The simple explanation being that both the Protheans and Angara were created by one singular race, the Jardaan, which could then easily explain why they both share so many similarities. So with this in mind, in this theory anyway, the villains we'll be facing in Mass Effect 5 are powerful enough to have created the most dominant organics we know. And here's how that could work without any retcons. When looking at the Protheans' origins, it says that very little is known about them, as even the name and location of their homeworld has been lost to history. It is also unknown when Prothean civilization arose. However, one Prothean beacon has been dated to as early as 68,000 BCE. We'll come back to this important tidbit later. As to the new theory, if the Protheans were created by the Jardaan, this wouldn't be a retcon, as their vague early history could work with this. As to why the Jardaan technology could be mistaken for Prothean tech, it could be a simple explanation of the Jardaan coming before the Protheans in the previous 50,000-year cycle. But I'll dive more into that later. So basically, the Jardaan probably didn't just create one race in the Angara, they likely created at least two. Couple that with their god complex, and we're looking at the next Mass Effect's villains having a massive amount of power. So which Milky Way race has that kind of power? Before revealing which race I think the Jardaan are, let's resolve one contradiction with the current theory. In Mass Effect Andromeda, Colonial Director Addison says that REM tech is less advanced than Prothean tech, and specifically that it thinks differently. If the Jardaan created the Protheans, you'd think that their technology would be more advanced, but I think Addison's musings here are mainly a misunderstanding. Prothean technology was very powerful and was also operated by organics. Anyone who picked up a Prothean gun could shoot it by pulling the trigger. However, Jardaan technology requires an extra step. You can't use it unless you have an organic-synthetic connection. But once it is unlocked, it's massively more advanced than Prothean tech, having abilities like terraforming entire planets relatively quickly. These differences in technology simply highlight how different the Jardaan think from the traditional Prothean. So if the Jardaan originated in the Milky Way and potentially made the Protheans, who were they? It would be fun if they were a completely unknown race. However, I don't think that's the case. Let's bring everything together to figure out the likely true identities of the next Mass Effect's villains. Taking all the known Jardaan facts from before, along with the theory guesses, here's the Jardaan's timeline. If the Jardaan originated in the Milky Way and created the Protheans prior to their departure, they must be a race from the 50,000-year cycle before the Protheans. This would make them advanced enough to partially design the Crucible, and to also influence the Protheans' origins in some way. Then, in order to avoid the Reaper's harvesting cycle, some of them escaped to the Andromeda galaxy, but didn't settle in the Heleus Cluster at first. Then, 50,000 years later in the Milky Way, the Protheans would have become the apex race, discovering the Jardaan's technology, resulting in visual similarities between the two. Over in the Andromeda galaxy, the Jardaan then somehow synthesized themselves, causing them to become organic synthetic hybrids. This would then influence their remnant technology, diverging from what the Protheans once knew. Then, after populating Andromeda, the Jardaan make their way to the Heleus Cluster and begin terraforming that system, also creating the Angara. We don't know much beyond this, except that they were attacked by a mysterious group called the Opposition. So with all this, I think who the Jardaan are can be narrowed down to one singular race. And it's a race we know about from Mass Effect 1. On the mysterious planet of Ilos, there are statues that were once thought to be Protheans. However, this was later retconned to instead become the race that influenced the Protheans' early development. That race being the Sanon, who I strongly believe are also the Jardaan. In the Mass Effect wiki, we learn that the Protheans discovered the ruins of the Sanon, and from there learned about Mass Effect physics and FTL technology. If Remtek's origins was a version of Sanon technology, this could explain the Jardaan and Prothean tech's visual similarities. Also, the only known codex on the Sanon is this one from the planet Angaran. It says that approximately 127,000 years ago, a series of battles were fought over it by two organic species, the Thoihan and the Sanon. Potentially, this conflict could have continued in Andromeda between the newly named Jardaan and the mysterious Opposition, but that's just a wild guess. Based on that war's dates though, it would mean that around 59,000 years separated the Protheans from the Sanon, and this gap of 59,000 years would be the perfect amount of time for the Sanon to create the Protheans before leaving the Milky Way. The wiki does mention that the Sanon were wiped out by the Reapers, but history also thought the Protheans were wiped out only for them to become the Collectors, so I won't rule out a retcon on their extinction just yet. Also, because the Protheans learned so much from the Sanon, they could have easily gained the Crucible plans from them too. So taking in all of this, it would mean that the biggest Milky Way and Andromeda connection would be a synthesized version of the Sanon, which would also make them the most likely villains in the next Mass Effect. And because of their enforced synthesis motivations, the Sanon, or now the Jardaan, likely wouldn't want to wipe everyone out like the Reapers. They instead might want complete submission by forcing every race to become hybrids just like them. Legit, it's kind of unhinged, but what if it's true? The argument going on at this table might be the heart of the next Mass Effect's plot. On one side is the Geth, who are in the process of being influenced by the godlike Jardaan, and on the other is the Angara, who are rejecting the Jardaan's nefarious ways. And maybe we've already glimpsed the solution to this dilemma through Shepard and Ryder, organics and synthetics working together in harmony instead of it being forced on them by some ancient beings. Now, despite the synthesized Sanon being potential big bads, I do think there's room for a second villain, which are newly built synthetics in the Milky Way. Watch this video next to see why the next Mass Effect might prove that the Reapers were actually right. See you there.